Sometimes the most life-changing message arrives on an ordinary day. I was sitting in my small apartment, Chicago's winter sky, pale beyond the window, when my phone buzzed. The screen glowed with a new message from my mother. Evelyn, about Christmas this year. It might be best if you skip it. We just want things to look right, especially with your brother's new fiancé coming. Hope you understand. Love, Mom. My heart didn't break, but it did pause a quiet ache blooming where hope had tried to grow year after year. Maybe you know this feeling. The sense of being the outsider in your own family, no matter how hard you try or how far you come. I smiled tightly, thinking how this wasn't the first time I'd been left out. In fact, it had become a kind of holiday tradition. But even as I stared at that message, something in me shifted. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt ready. All my life, I tried to be what my family wanted. Growing up in the Blake household meant following unspoken rules. Smile quietly, don't ask for too much, never outshine your brother. Family dinners were filled with laughter, but my stories always faded beneath the shine of my brother's latest achievement. When I was young, I believed there was something wrong with me, some invisible mark that made me easy to overlook. But the truth is, sometimes we're just different. Sometimes we want something more, a chance to create our own path, even if it means stepping away from the table we once longed to join. That's where my story really begins. Not with that message, but with the choice I made years ago to build a life on my own terms. This isn't just a story about being left out at Christmas. It's about what happens when you dare to leave the shadows and claim your own light. Maybe you felt it too, that quiet fire, the hope that someday you'll be seen, not just for what you do, but for who you truly are. If so, this story is for you. Before we go further, let me ask, have you ever felt invisible, even to the people who were supposed to know you best? Have you ever wondered if there's a place in the world where you belong, just as you are? Stay with me, because what happened after that message didn't just change my Christmas, it changed everything I believed about family success and finding my place in the world. Let's begin not with what I lost, but with what I found on a cold December morning, a heart quietly daring to dream of something more. In the Blake family, love was a quiet thing, something measured more by glances than words. I grew up watching my brother Daniel soak in the warmth at every gathering, his jokes, his trophies, his easy charm. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one, the helper, the kid with good grades that never quite dazzled enough. I remember my 8th grade science fair ribbon tucked away in a drawer, while Daniel's soccer trophy sat at the center of the mantel. Even then, I wondered if maybe in my family's eyes there was only so much sunlight to go around. It's a hard truth for many people. Sometimes families pick favorites without meaning to. Maybe your sibling is more outgoing, or maybe they fit the family's expectations a little closer than you do. For me, it was never about jealousy, but about a soft, persistent ache wanting to be seen, to be enough. Even when my achievements were quietly brushed aside. I learned to clap the loudest for Daniel, to shrink myself so his moments could shine. It became a kind of habit, easy as breathing. Looking back, I see now how much those small moments shape us. When I failed a test, my parents would sigh and say, "It's okay, honey, we know you tried." But when Daniel brought home a B, the house filled with laughter, my father ruffling his hair, my mother insisting on a celebratory dessert. Those memories aren't bitter, just real, a reminder that sometimes love is uneven, even when it isn't unkind. I know many people who felt the same, sitting quietly at the edge of someone else's spotlight. One day in high school, my art teacher pulled me aside after class. "Evelyn," she said, "you have a voice. Don't let anyone else write your story." That day I went home and started a secret sketchbook, filling its pages with dreams I never dared say aloud. It was the first time someone told me I mattered for who I was, not just for what I could do for others. It's funny how one small encouragement can become a seed quietly growing into something strong, even if it takes years to bloom. The lesson I learned, and that I hope you'll remember, is that being invisible doesn't mean you have no value. Sometimes it's just that the people around you aren't looking in the right direction. It's easy to let yourself become small when it feels safer not to rock the boat. But the world needs every kind of light, even the gentle kind that flickers quietly at the edge of things. If you've ever felt overlooked, know that you're not alone. So many of us grow up in the shadows of someone else's dream, learning how to blend in, how to minimize our own hopes. But every story, every person deserves to be heard. And sometimes it's in those silent corners that the strongest voices begin to find their shape. Little by little, I started to imagine what life could look like if I stepped out from behind my brother's shadow. That thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Could I become someone different? Could I risk disappointing my family, just to chase something I couldn't even fully describe? Those questions lingered as I grew older, quietly guiding me toward a crossroads I never saw coming. And that truly is where the real story begins. The summer after graduation, the Blake home felt both comforting and unbearably tight. My parents hoped I would join Blake & Sons just as Daniel had secured a guaranteed seat at every Sunday dinner. The idea sounded safe, but deep inside, I felt a longing for something uncharted, a life that was truly mine. I remember sitting with my father on the back porch, the evening sun painting everything gold. "You're playing it safe, Evie," he said, meaning well. But what he saw as security, I felt as limitation, a well-meaning fence around a garden that was never really mine. Making the decision to walk away wasn't easy. It meant choosing uncertainty over comfort, silence over familiar applause. I applied for jobs in Chicago that had nothing to do with the family business, internships at small startups, freelance writing gigs, anything that allowed me to build something from the ground up. My mother worried, and my brother teased gently. "You'll be back, sis. Dad always says the city eats dreamers for breakfast." Their words stung, but deep down, I knew I needed to find my own strength, even if it meant falling flat a few times along the way. It's a familiar story for many, the fear of stepping outside what's expected, especially when your family's reputation is on the line. I think of people like Howard Schultz, who left behind the comfort of his childhood neighborhood to build Starbucks, or Oprah Winfrey, who chose her own voice over what was prescribed for her. Their paths weren't smooth, but they were authentic. For every person who stays in the safe lane, there's someone quietly wondering what might be possible if they just try, a truth I held close, even on days when I doubted myself. What I learned is that courage isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's a quiet resolve, a decision to show up for yourself day after day, even when no one is watching. Walking away from home didn't mean rejecting my family. It meant honoring the part of me that needed to grow, even if it made others uncomfortable. I learned to celebrate small wins, like paying my first rent, finding friends who understood my ambitions, and learning to trust my own instincts. The lesson in all this: sometimes you have to be willing to disappoint others in order to be true to yourself. Families may not always understand your choices, and that's okay. Their vision for your life isn't the same as your own. What matters is having the courage to try to fall and to stand up again, knowing you are building something real, even if it's invisible to the people who love you most. As I packed my bags and stepped onto the train to Chicago, my heart pounded with both fear and hope. Would I make it? Would I prove them wrong or prove myself right? I didn't know then, but I was about to discover that real belonging doesn't come from fitting in. It comes from standing up, stepping forward, and trusting that you're exactly where you need to be, even if the journey is only just beginning. Chicago greeted me with a blast of wind and possibility. My first apartment was little more than a studio with creaky floors and a view of the alley, but it was mine. Every morning, I rose before sunrise, juggling part-time jobs and online courses, while sketching business ideas on napkins at the corner cafe. Starting over was humbling. I remember answering phones at a temp agency, brewing coffee for someone else's clients, even tutoring kids in math on weekends, just to make rent. Each day was a quiet victory, a reminder that independence is built not by leaps, but by steady, sometimes invisible steps. Building EB Consulting began not with a lightning bolt, but with late nights and stubborn faith. I took on freelance research projects, sometimes for almost nothing, just to earn testimonials and practice my craft. I made cold calls, faced rejection, learned to pitch ideas in crowded rooms where no one knew my name. The work was slow, sometimes lonely, and I often wondered if I had made a mistake. Still, each tiny win, a client's thank you, a successful project, a check with my name on it, sparked the belief that maybe this dream could take root. It helped to look for inspiration beyond my own struggle. I read about small businesses that started in garages, restaurants built on family recipes, and tech startups run by people who once slept on friends' couches. One story that stuck with me was Sarah Blakely, who sold fax machines door to door before creating Spanx in her tiny Atlanta apartment. Her grit reminded me that beginnings don't have to look grand to become meaningful. We don't see the messy middle in other people's stories, but that's where most of the growing happens. One of the most surprising lessons from this season was that asking for help is a kind of strength, not a weakness. Early on, I tried to do everything myself, balancing books, designing websites, managing clients. But when I started to lean on mentors, to listen to advice, to admit what I didn't know, my business found its feet. Community matters even when you're determined to prove you can do it all. I learned that vulnerability doesn't diminish your light. Sometimes it's what draws others to help you shine. Every step forward was proof that I didn't have to fit the old mold to create something worthwhile. In fact, building EB Consulting from scratch taught me more about resilience and character than any easy success ever could. If you're starting over, remember you don't need the biggest office or the fanciest resume. You just need persistence, humility, and the courage to keep going even when progress is invisible. Looking back, I realize those early days marked by ramen dinners, self-doubt, and tiny moments of triumph were the foundation for everything that came next. As EB Consulting slowly grew, so did my confidence. I was no longer just the girl in the shadows. I was a founder, a builder, a quiet force with something unique to offer. And soon that force would ripple far beyond my small apartment, setting the stage for a reckoning my family never saw coming. As EB Consulting started to find its footing, the world grew wider and smaller at the same time. My work put me in rooms I'd once only dreamed of, negotiating contracts, advising on mergers, and quietly steering decisions that would ripple across cities. My name never made headlines, but that was how I liked it, letting results speak louder than introductions. Ironically, my family's firm, Blake & Sons, began to struggle just as my consulting practice was taking off. The industry was shifting, and they didn't see the change coming until it was nearly too late. It's a twist I've seen play out far beyond my own story. Family businesses often start strong, rooted in tradition and pride, but sometimes those roots make it hard to adapt. My parents clung to the old ways, certain that reputation alone would keep their company secure. But the world moves fast. I remember reading about iconic companies like Kodak or Blockbuster that lost their edge by refusing to evolve, believing their legacy would outlast innovation. The parallels hit close to home, a quiet reminder that no one is immune to change, not even the families we think are untouchable. One day I recognized Blake & Sons on a list of struggling firms needing strategic guidance. My own consulting team had been hired to advise their competitors, and suddenly I found myself holding insider knowledge of the challenges my family faced. It was a strange, bittersweet power to be the outsider with the ability to help, and the daughter still kept at arm's length. I watched as my father's pride kept him from asking for advice, while my brother doubled down on the same strategies that were quietly sinking them. What surprised me most was how quickly vulnerability can turn the powerful into underdogs. The firm that once seemed invincible was now calling out for partnerships and fresh capital. They needed a new direction, but ego kept them from seeing the solutions right in front of them. I learned that sometimes the hardest thing for leaders, especially in families, is admitting they don't have all the answers. That lesson stuck with me. Humility is a hidden strength, and stubborn pride can turn even the strongest into the weakest, almost overnight. For a while, I wondered if I should reveal myself, step in, and offer the help they desperately needed. But something held me back, not resentment, but respect for the journey I was on. I realized that sometimes, in order to truly change, people need to reach their breaking point on their own. My role for now was to keep building, keep growing, and let my work speak for itself. As the months passed and my family's firm edged closer to a crisis, I sensed a reckoning on the horizon. Life has a way of bringing hidden truths to light, no matter how carefully we tuck them away. I didn't know it yet, but the next chapter would force all of us, myself included, to confront the stories we told about Power Family and what it really means to succeed. The day the truth finally came out felt surreal, like stepping into a story I'd once only imagined. Blake & Sons, desperate for a partner, had been courting a firm they thought was a lifeline, EB Consulting. What my family didn't know was that I was the founder behind the name. The negotiations were all business at first, until my team suggested an in-person meeting to finalize the deal. My parents prepared for days, never guessing the woman they'd meet across the table was their daughter, now grown and quietly powerful in ways they'd never understood. When I walked into that glass-walled conference room, the air tightened. My father's face went pale, my mother's hands trembled, and Daniel, my brother, blinked in stunned silence. For a moment nobody spoke. I simply smiled, greeting them by name, my voice steadier than I felt. "Welcome to EB Consulting," I said, sliding the contract forward. The irony of it all, the overlooked daughter holding the fate of the family business, settled over us. The room was heavy with disbelief, pride, and something that felt strangely like regret. It's a moment that echoes far beyond my own life. I've heard from friends, colleagues, and even strangers' online stories about being underestimated by those closest to them, only to surprise everyone when given a real chance. One friend, Maria, once worked as a temp in her father's company before launching her own startup, eventually outpacing the family business. These stories remind me that sometimes the greatest strength comes from having to prove yourself in silence, growing roots deep enough to weather any storm, even the storms created by people who should be your strongest supporters. That day, the conversation was awkward at first, filled with formalities and thinly veiled shock. But as the details of the deal unfolded, it became clear that my company was now in a position to help or not help Blake & Sons survive. I saw pride warring with fear in my father's eyes, and for once my brother had no quick retort. I realized then that recognition earned under pressure tastes bittersweet. I had always longed for my family's approval, but when it came, it arrived tangled in desperation and surprise. The lesson I took from that meeting is this: never underestimate the quiet ones, the overlooked, the invisible. People may try to define your worth by old stories or outdated roles, but growth is happening all the time, often in places no one thinks to look. The best revenge, if you can call it that, isn't in gloating or rubbing it in. It's in thriving, living proof that your value was always real, no matter who noticed or didn't. As I left the conference room, I knew things would never be the same. The next steps weren't about winning or losing, but about facing hard truths on both sides. The facade of old family roles was finally broken. Now each of us would have to reckon with who we truly were and what it meant to let go of the stories that had held us back for so long. The days that followed our meeting were a blur of news headlines and long sleepless nights. The local business press caught wind of the dramatic turn at Blake & Sons family firm. Saved by outsider CEO, one article read, though only a few guessed the true connection. I watched my parents scramble to maintain appearances, smiling for reporters, insisting this was always part of their plan. But behind closed doors, their voices grew tight with fear. I could feel the weight of decades pressing down on all of us as the truth threatened to dismantle the image they'd worked so hard to protect. Family reputations in business can be a double-edged sword. Growing up, I'd seen how much my parents valued how we looked from the outside: holiday cards with perfectly staged smiles, formal speeches at company picnics, even small-town gossip carefully managed over coffee. But in those days after the reveal, I realized how quickly the illusion could shatter. A friend once told me about her own family's crisis, when a sibling's hidden struggles suddenly became public, and the carefully constructed image crumbled overnight. Image, it turned out, was never strong enough to hold us together. In meetings with my own team, I made a point to be honest about the challenges, the opportunities, and the messiness of real life. We talked openly about the danger of believing your own hype, about how companies and people can lose their way when they cling to a story that no longer fits. I even shared the lessons from my family's struggle, reminding everyone that progress often means letting go of old definitions of success, no matter how comforting they once seemed. One lesson stood out the clearest: authenticity is more valuable than perfection. It's tempting to keep up appearances, especially when you're afraid of being judged. But over time, people are drawn to honesty, to vulnerability, and to real stories of stumbling and getting back up. I learned that my value and my company's value wasn't in looking flawless, but in being willing to face the truth and adapt even when it hurt. When the image faded, what remained was the hard work, the character, and the relationships that truly mattered. In the weeks that followed, my family grew quieter, humbled, but still unsure of how to move forward. The company survived, but not because we kept up the old facade. It survived because we finally acknowledged the cracks and began to rebuild slowly, honestly, and together for the first time in years. That's the real power of truth. It makes room for healing even after everything falls apart. The story didn't end with that reveal. If anything, it set the stage for a different kind of growth, a slow unraveling of old habits, a new commitment to honesty, and the difficult but hopeful work of redefining what family and success could mean. The next chapter would ask even harder questions, but now at last we were ready to try answering them. The weeks after the big reveal felt strangely quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. My parents and Daniel kept their distance, each retreating into their own corner of grief and regret. Sometimes I would catch myself wondering if I had gone too far, if my need to be seen had cost my family more than I'd meant. Guilt settled on my shoulders, heavy as winter snow, especially during the moments when I heard my mother's voice on the phone, softer now tinged with apology. The success I'd fought for felt complicated, tangled up with old memories and new wounds. It isn't unusual to feel conflicted after standing your ground, especially against family. I once spoke with a former client, Jen, who'd left her father's company to open her own bakery. She told me that even after she found success, she sometimes mourned the distance her decision created. There's a certain loneliness that comes with breaking away, even when you know it's right. For me, every victory with EB Consulting was edged with bittersweetness, a reminder of both what I'd gained and what I'd lost. Regret is a tricky thing. Some days it whispers that things might have been easier if I'd just accepted my place, kept quiet, and followed the path laid out for me. But deep down, I know that peace built on self-denial is never truly peaceful. We can't go back and rewrite our choices, but we can choose how to move forward. I learned to forgive myself, to see that my journey was not just about success, but about honoring the truth of who I am, even when it hurts those I love. In time, opportunities for second chances began to appear, quiet gestures, small conversations, invitations to coffee that weren't quite apologies, but felt like hope. My father asked for my opinion on a new business plan. Daniel started sending messages late at night just to check in. Healing wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't instant, but it started with honesty and patience. I realized that sometimes families need to fall apart a little in order to come back together in a healthier way. The lesson I carry from this season is that it's okay to feel everything: the pride, the guilt, the sadness, and even the hope. Real growth doesn't erase mistakes. It invites us to learn from them. If you find yourself mourning the cost of your own independence, know that it's a sign of your heart, not your weakness. Love can survive even the hardest conversations if we let it. Those months taught me that reconciliation is possible, but it looks different for everyone. The important thing is to keep the door open, to stay willing to listen and to forgive, even if the healing comes in small, imperfect steps. As the days lengthened and spring approached, I felt a new kind of peace growing, a sense that maybe it was time to redefine family success and belonging for myself on my own terms. As I moved through that season of rebuilding, I started to notice the quiet strength of the people who had stood beside me all along. My closest friends in Chicago became a kind of chosen family, showing up with soup when I was sick, cheering at every small business milestone, and listening without judgment when the past came calling. There was Lucy, my first client, who later became my confidant, and Sam, my neighbor, who always remembered to invite me for Thanksgiving. Their steady presence reminded me that family isn't just a matter of blood, but of loyalty and love freely given. This idea of finding belonging outside your original family felt both comforting and liberating. I remembered stories I'd heard from colleagues like Mark, whose parents had moved overseas when he was young. He built his own support system from friends, teachers, and even mentors at work. Their encouragement helped him weather storms his relatives never even knew about. For many of us, these connections become lifelines, teaching us that home is often a circle of open arms rather than a single address. Sometimes the people who see you most clearly aren't the ones you grew up with. The more I let these friendships deepen, the less urgent it became to chase approval from the family I was born into. I learned that acceptance doesn't have to be earned through perfect behavior or big achievements. It grows naturally when you allow yourself to be known and loved as you are. Our hearts are resilient, capable of growing new roots wherever kindness and understanding take hold. In those simple, everyday moments, shared meals, laughter after long days, a text just to say thinking of you, I found the belonging I'd always wanted. The lesson I took from this time is that real family is made by choice and commitment, not just genetics. We get to decide who we let into our lives, and we can nurture those bonds as carefully as any we were born into. It's a gift to discover that you are never truly alone, even if your childhood story was full of empty seats at the table. There is always a chance to build a new community, one meal, one honest conversation at a time. Slowly, the ache of old disappointments faded, replaced by gratitude for the connections I'd found. My life felt fuller, softer, and much more real. As the next chapter began to unfold, I was no longer defined by absence or rejection, but by the genuine warmth of the people who chose me and whom I chose in return. The final part of this story isn't just about finding family, but about finally learning to belong to myself. Looking back, I see how every step, every disappointment, every risk, every quiet triumph built the life I have now. I started as the invisible daughter in a house where love was measured in tradition and appearances. By leaving home, I found the courage to build something of my own brick by brick, through countless setbacks and small victories. Even as my family became the underdog, I learned that real strength is sometimes found in being overlooked and growing quietly, until the day comes when your light can no longer be ignored. When the truth finally surfaced, it shattered the illusion that had held my family together for so long. The shock was real, but so was the relief. No more pretending, no more shrinking myself to fit a story that was never mine. I discovered that authenticity and vulnerability matter more than keeping up appearances. Facing guilt and regret. I realized that healing takes time, but second chances are possible if we're honest and brave enough to reach for them. The family I found wasn't just the one I was born into, but also the one I built with trust, loyalty, and shared laughter. I hope my story reminds you that you don't have to earn your worth by fitting someone else's mold or waiting for approval from those who can't see your true self. Belonging starts with being honest about what you want and what you need. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for others is to step into your own light, even if it means stepping away from what's familiar. Real family, real connection, and real success come from choosing truth over and over, even when it's hard. If you've ever felt invisible, underestimated, or pushed aside, I want you to know you are not alone. There is a community here right now cheering you on. Your voice matters. Your dreams matter. The life you imagine is possible, no matter how unlikely it seems from where you stand. Let this be your sign you don't need their seat at the table. Build your own and invite the people who see you for who you truly are. If this story touched you, if you saw yourself in any part of my journey, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share what you've overcome or simply say, I see you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join this growing circle of support. Together we can lift each other up and prove that the tables we build for ourselves are the ones that truly last.